Yes, Brandon Ingram has to start for the New Orleans Pelicans, but he doesn't have to close games for them. It's the Thursday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Thursday. We got a heck of a show for you here on Locked On Pelicans. Yeah, Brandon Ingram has to start, but he doesn't need to close games, and that might elevate the New Orleans Pelicans. Plus, we're going to look at the TV deal for New Orleans. What's it mean for you? Or not for New Orleans, but for the NBA. What's it mean for you? It's all coming up in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube and become an everydayer. Shout it out if you're an everydayer in the comments down below on YouTube. You should be proud of that. You know what's going on with this team. So let's get into it with Brandon Ingram. This was a great question. I absolutely loved this question. This one came from Mark Rudd at Mark A. Rudd, RUDD on Twitter. And he says, assuming Ingram doesn't get traded before the start of the season and doesn't alter his shot selection, very good caveat there, is there any chance he gets pulled from the starting lineup? And I like this because it dovetails perfectly into something that I said in yesterday's show that I want to talk about, the closing lineup. But let's start with Ingram in the starting lineup. You know, we don't know who New Orleans is going to start yet. That's still something that we're trying to figure out. That's something that a Brandon Ingram trade seems to help. You have one position that's a little bit uncertain, and that's the center spot, and then you have talent anywhere else. So if you trade Ingram for a center, cool, you have your starting center, and now you have an open other starting spot that Herb Jones or DeJounte Murray or CJ McCollum or Trey Murphy can all fill because you can't start everybody. So that fixes that problem. But if Ingram isn't traded and say he keeps declining on shooting threes, can you still start him, or should you run DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, Herb Jones, Zion Williamson, and say Daniel Tice? Because they're going to likely start a center over Zion at the 5. So here's the thing. You have to start Brandon Ingram. And there's a number of reasons for this. And let's start with this one. The first one is he is a talented basketball player. Is the fit with him and Zion a little bit questionable? Yes. Is the shot selection a little bit questionable? Absolutely. But here's the thing. He's still a talented basketball player, and we should not lose sight of that. This is not a dude who sucks, at all. Fit question, sure, all of those things. Tough to maybe build around, yeah. But he's still a dude that can go out and score, and you need those type of players. For his time here in New Orleans, he averages 23.1 points per game. He's a good player. 5 rebounds, 5 assists, right? That's near 25, 5, and 5 every night. He's been remarkably consistent with Zion in the lineup, with Zion out of the lineup. But now as they go towards a more Zion-centric offense, or should, yeah, we're wondering if the fit's going to be there. But he's a talented basketball player. Last season, with him in the lineup, they were 38 and 26. For his career here in New Orleans, I looked it up. He's 144 and 43. It's a winning record. Not amazing winning record over the career here, but last season was pretty good. He's a good player, right? Let's not lose sight of that. 2, he elevated his game defensively. It's rare for players kind of this late in their career to try harder on the defensive side of the ball. And he did it. He bought more in on defense. The Pelicans have been a top 6 defense, literally 6th ranked the past 2 seasons. And that's where their identity is. And it's led to some really good things. Brandon Ingram is a part of that. He's also a playmaker, not a lead at it, but he can play some point forward. 5 assists per game is nothing to just laugh at or wave away. When you have Zion Williamson at times in and out of the lineup, having someone that can handle the rock and, distribute to others is an important thing. Now you have DeJounte Murray coming in, but I don't think you want him being the point guard full time. You still want other guys to share the ball, and DeJounte Murray can work off ball too, proving that he's like a decent spot up 3-point shooter. Fourth for Brandon Ingram here. You want his trade value to be as high as possible. Now, I don't think there's a ton that will impact his trade value this season. Say he doesn't sign an extension. And if he doesn't sign an extension, you're looking at trading him by the trade deadline. Or even if he does, you can trade him next off season. You want that value to be high because it is, I don't know if it's low. I don't know exactly where it is right now, but if it was easy to find a deal to trade him, it would have happened by now. One of the things that I think would crater his value is bringing him off the bench. That says something, right? Like, oh, we don't view him as a starter, or he doesn't fit around our star player. You're not going to trade him to a team where he would be like the main guy on the team. Even if you traded him to Detroit, it's him and Cade Cunningham. Him starting, I do think, is important. And if you brought him off the bench, it would crater his trade value. And that's not in the Pelicans' best interest to do whatsoever. The fifth reason, and I'm going to sneeze here, unfortunately. Hold on. Okay, that's what we get for trying to one-take everything here on the show. The fifth reason, he would not be happy. He would not be happy, right? Managing egos and personalities is the toughest thing for an NBA coach to do. And while I do think Willie Green has done a good job of getting guys to buy in, I don't know if it's going to work on Brandon Ingram. This is someone who, when I talked to him in a one-on-one interview before, during media day last year, and I asked him, did you talk to Borrego yet? What's the offense going to look like? He goes, I'm going to have the ball in my hands. Like, this is the guy that wants to have the rock and be the man on the team. I think part of his lack of fitting in is, he's not, and that's what he wants when it's Zion. And that's maybe just not easy for him to accept. I will say, though, it is end of season media availability. He definitely kind of seemed to understand that things need to change if he wants his career to kind of keep going in the direction that it could be, to earn as much money as possible. So I wonder if that's going to potentially change. But if you were like, hey, we need you to come off the bench, he's not going to take well to that. That's going to hurt his trade value. What does that do to the rest of the team in terms of chemistry, locker room, all of that stuff? That, I think, is a little bit too big of a risk, but it also ties into he's a talented basketball player, right? He's one of your 5 best players. He should probably be in the starting lineup. Let me ask you, though, do you think he should start? Do you think he should come off of the bench? If that's the situation, let me know what you think in the comments down below on YouTube. But here's the other thing with it all. Just because he starts doesn't mean he has to close games. We have evidence that maybe he shouldn't be. We're going to look at that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Game Time. It is the summer, and that means it is baseball season. Is there anywhere better than being out at the ballpark, having some snacks, having some drinks, enjoying the outside and watching the game? Really isn't. You can make it happen with Game Time, because Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. And prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it is to first pitch. Game Time is my go-to ticketing app for a variety of reasons. They have the seat views. You can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. You're going to a venue that you've never been to before. Cool, you can see the view from your seats. They also have flash deals, so you can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. I say event because it's not just sporting events, right? It's comedy, it's theater, it's concerts, anything you could want. And they also have the Game Time guarantee, which means Game Time is going to credit you 110% of the difference if you find tickets in the same section and row for less. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as Well, and now for your second listen today. Locked On Saints. Ross Jackson breaking down everything black and gold. He is there at training camp in Irvine covering everything. So the boots on the ground perspective. Subscribe to the Locked On Saints podcast. Make them your second listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Brandon Ingram, I think he needs to start. I think that's like a locked-in starting spot for him. I think if you're looking at anyone coming off the bench, it would be maybe CJ McCollum. But Brandon Ingram doesn't have to close games. He doesn't have to close games at all. And in fact, adding DeJounte Murray and having these kind of questions of like, who do they start, I think is more impactful on the closing lineup. And that's where you might not see Brandon Ingram. It gives Willie Green far more options. The Pelicans were not good in clutch situations last year. And if you're a new listener to the show, clutch situations are when the score is within 5 points plus or minus 5, so neither team is ahead by more than 5 points, and it's the final 5 minutes of the game. So a close game with 5 minutes to go, essentially, or less, right? Fewer, whatever it is. You know, when you look at their Pelicans clutch stats, and we talked about this a little bit the other day, wasn't great last year. DeJounte Murray is one of the more, I don't want to call him clutch players in the league, but he scores in the clutch. Brandon Ingram struggled with that this past season. So the Pelicans were not good in clutch situations, but when you get into some of the lineup data, and it's a little bit messy there, you start to see some trends. I'm looking at just the fourth quarter because fourth quarters in general were trouble for New Orleans. They were better with Zion on the court and Brandon Ingram off. So we're looking at all 12 minutes here. Any minutes where Zion was on the court without Brandon Ingram, they were better than with both of them on the court together. So the fact is, all of these different players allow maybe better lineup combinations for New Orleans. And it might also depend on what you're trying to do or be team specific. Let's go back to that Lakers game at the end of the regular season. Zion was taking over before he got hurt. Basically unstoppable and leading like a near 20-point comeback. The Lakers were on the ropes. The Pelicans were going to win that game if Zion Williamson doesn't get hurt. And Ingram wasn't on the court for it. Willie Green put him on the bench. He optimized the lineup around Zion Williamson, and Zion just almost led this team to a win. You know, normally you probably couldn't do that if you're New Orleans. You need threats on the court, people who are credible with the ball in their hands are a threat to score. People who can draw 2 to the ball, right? Zion draws 2, 3, 4, 5. You need another scorer like Brandon Ingram. Even from mid-range there, that's not bad because that's what defenses are going to give you. But if you're trying to optimize Zion and you can put other threats on there while optimizing him, an entirely different story. That's when you might see Zion at the 5 and a super small ball lineup of Zion Williamson, CJ McCollum for the shooting, DeJounte Murray to run your offense to and give you that secondary score, then Herb Jones for defense and Trey Murphy for shooting, right? Murray can shoot, Herb can shoot, Trey can shoot, CJ can shoot. You're putting 4 shooters who have also other reasons to be out there on the court around Zion Williamson. If Ingram's not going to take threes and space the court or be a credible threat, that maybe means you don't need to close with him. We have some data, some evidence, even if it's a small sample size, that maybe it's better that he doesn't. Now, Ingram can also be clutch. We can think of a number of game winners that he's had here and big games. I can think against the Utah Jazz a couple of years ago with Rudy Gobert, battles against the Minnesota Timberwolves too. Like Ingram can do it too, but if you're trying to optimize Zion Williamson, no, I don't think Ingram needs to be in the closing lineup. But a lot of this is going to come down to Ingram and what he does. You know, the question was prefaced with if he doesn't change his shot selection. You know, if maybe all of this is an eye-opening situation for him and he realizes I need to make some changes, that can go a long way towards one, rehabbing the value that he has, but also making him like a very important player for New Orleans. I promise you, that was my biggest takeaway at his end of season media availability was like, I think he realized like this didn't work. Like he didn't seem like his usual self there. Like something seemed to have gotten through to him. This wasn't someone who was defiant of like, I played the right way. Look, he struggled in the playoffs, partially because Zion Williamson wasn't there. No one else was being a threat. CJ struggled mightily in that series against OKC. It just meant that you had Ingram kind of being the lone guy to go and score. And it's annoying that Lou Dort basically locked him down one-on-one. But there wasn't like anyone taking pressure off of Brandon Ingram. Now, he probably should have beaten Lou Dort one-on-one, and he didn't, and that says something. But you get what I'm saying. He wasn't done any favors by the situation of no Zion Williamson out there. So that goes to what kind of point one in the last segment of like, he's not as bad as we think. Like, let's be clear on that. He's a good player. So you look at this type of situation where, yeah, they don't necessarily need him to close games, and I don't think they will. But also if he kind of reinvents himself in a way, shoots more threes. They got the point guard he wanted, right? Like, there's no excuse now. No excuse for him not to be taking 8 or more threes per game. It is something he's fully capable of doing. But if he's not going to do that, no, you probably don't need to play him in the fourth quarter. And as long as Zion Williamson's healthy and you have DeJounte Murray to kind of fill that other role, put Trey Murphy out there, put Herb Jones out there, put CJ McCollum out there. That right now might be the best closing lineup. Again, the numbers state in the fourth quarter that the team was better with Zion on the court when he was just out there by himself without Brandon Ingram. That is telling in a way about the lack of fit there. And I'm someone who's previously defended their fit, right? Every year until this year, I did a show that was like, yeah, they can fit together. People say they don't, and they did until this year when things just seemed really weird. And it's why it was ultimately a disappointing season for the New Orleans Pelicans. But I do think Brandon Ingram realizes, hey, like, this wasn't great. I need to do things a little bit differently. If he does, that can be a pretty elite secondary guy. He's not the number one on the team. It's Zion Williamson. It's as simple as that. DeJounte Murray acknowledged it in his introductory press conference when asked about Zion, saying, that's our superstar. That's our superstar. I like that. Knowing your role. The hierarchy is an important thing here. Where Brandon Ingram fits into that with Murray, with Zion, is a little bit questionable right now. But Ingram's not number one. Is he two? Is he three? That's another question. But if he can kind of figure out his place, and that's going to be an adjustment for him. Look at Team USA with him last year. He didn't do well not being the man with the ball in his hands. But if he can change a little bit, that then kind of changes the calculus of this. He's in the starting lineup. That just makes the starting lineup more effective, right? Less clunky. And that would be good because the Pelican starters weren't great last year. They need them to be better because you can't rely on your bench as much as they did, particularly in the postseason when rotations get shortened and you don't get to beat up on the 10th, 11th, sometimes 12th man of opponents' rosters. The starters need to be better. That's going to start with Brandon Ingram. If it just really doesn't work there, yeah, you have the option to drop him eventually, but that won't be the case on opening night. You know, if it gets really, really bad, you can maybe look at that change, but it also might depend on the Pelicans' record. If they're winning games, you don't want to rock the boat too much when it comes to those sorts of things. Let me know what you think about Brandon Ingram in the closing lineup, not the starting lineup. I said I think he's a starter for sure. Closing lineup, not at all. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. Coming up next, the NBA TV media rights stuff is changing. We're not going to go into all of it because I don't think it truly matters to a lot of us. But there's a couple of points that I really want to highlight that I think are important and then kind of signal a little bit of the changing landscape and what it'll mean for you in watching the Pelicans. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans. We are the #1 Pelicans podcast here, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And oh, by the way, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on the Amazon Fire TV in the Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Day is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. So we're going to switch gears here from talking about Brandon Ingram, but that was a listener question, and that was a great one, and I really appreciate Mark Red with that one. If you got a good one, let me know. Send them on Twitter, put it in the comments down below here. Tell a friend about Locked On Pelicans as well, by the way. So the NBA kind of announced, or it's like leaking out, their new television rights deals, and things are going to be changing. It sounds like no more TNT. NBC is getting it back. So let's start with that one. My favorite part of all of this, for a moment, is the NBC deal because we get Round Ball Rock back. We have not heard that on NBA broadcast since 2002, and I miss it. If you're a little bit younger, you're going to hear it. You've probably been hearing it. It's iconic. I don't know. I've been playing it kind of like over and over the past day, just listening to it, seeing it on Twitter. NBC had an incredible video where they showed the old highlights, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, with the audio sounding a little bit old. Then all of a sudden it like switches to Steph Curry and some of the newer players, high definition and then high def audio. And it was like, oh, this is back. I dig it. The problem I have with the NBC rights, this impacts you potentially for Pelicans national TV games next season, is they're also going to have the Tuesday night games. So you're going to get Tuesday night NBA on NBC. They're having 2 start times. So usually when you get 2 games, there's like a West Coast game and an East Coast game. On like it was on TNT, it'll now be on NBC here. The first game is going to be an 8 p.m. Eastern tip-off time, so 7 p.m. Central. It's an hour later than what we're used to when the Pelicans are on the East Coast. It's usually a 6 p.m. Central time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. It's now going to be 8 and 7, so it's an hour later. The West Coast time is also worse. Normally, those are around a 9:30 p.m. tip-off for New Orleans, 9:30. It's going to be 10 o'clock. It's 8 p.m. West Coast start, too. So instead of it being 9, it's probably going to be 10 o'clock, and that's if it starts on time. We are going to be up later on Tuesday nights, which for me, because I do our Locked On NBA podcast show on Wednesdays, and I got to wait for those games to end no matter what, going to be up even later. Don't love that. We need to get the Pelicans in the East, but if you're an everydayer, you know that's not going to happen because we talked about it here on the Locked On Pelicans podcast. The other thing that I find interesting here is the way Amazon's getting involved. And this maybe portends a couple of other things here. So it might eventually mean the death of regional sports networks, RSNs. You've heard that a lot. Bally Sports is an RSN, a regional sports network, and it hasn't been, I think, ideal for Pelicans fans. You know, one of the things that this new TV deal does is create more national TV games, which means fewer games on those regional sports networks. And the good news is, you know, all the people that you like listening to, Joel Myers, Antonio Daniels, Todd Graffinini, John DeShazer, Aaron Summers, on all of their broadcasts, whether it's radio or TV, are employed by the team. So whatever happens, you will still hear them calling games wherever those games are going to be. Let's get that out of the way right now. But fewer games, you know, only available on the regional sports network. That's good. If you can't access Bally Sports, this means you can get it elsewhere, whether it's Peacock, whether it's Amazon, whether it's ESPN, NBA TV, all of those things. So you will probably, you know, and this doesn't go into effect next season, it's the year after next season. It'll probably be slightly easier to be able to watch Pelicans games overall. That I do think is a good thing. Even if it's like you got to go through different ways to go and find those games, they're going to be available. Amazon getting in is interesting because Amazon seems to want to get in on the live sports game. And this is speculation on my part. You know, I would not be shocked if they eventually kind of converge all of the NBA stuff through Amazon and their streaming reach that they have. You know, RSNs seem to be going away a little bit. You just heard James Dolan, the owner of the Knicks, who owns one of the biggest RSNs, like being real upset about this, which means that's maybe a good thing for everyone else, that's going away. But I would not be shocked if basically Amazon kind of becomes like the League Pass carrier, and that's how we watch games in the future. And it sounds like they're maybe looking at doing this, of creating some sort of app, maybe backed by Amazon's technology, streaming technology, of like a portal basically that's like League Pass, but you can get your RSN games, your local games on there, which you normally can't get through League Pass in the local market. And then they'll figure out how the money works with all of that. That might be the direction that we're kind of heading with all of this, which, look, I don't know if it's going to be a good or bad thing yet. You know, it's not easy to watch every NFL game if you wanted to in a given week because you need so many different apps and logins. If you're a big soccer fan, right, it's kind of annoying. Serie A, I'm a big AC Milan fan. That's on NBC and Peacock. But other leagues I want to watch are on ESPN Plus or somewhere else, right? And that's a hassle. It's nice to have it all in one spot. You know, all the jokes of like, oh, we created cable by having all of these different things, right? Or like the opposite of cable. If we had them all in one place, that would be cable and that would be great. There's got to be a better solution than there is now. And I do think the NBA is actively working on that because they realize access to these games is one of the most important things. So Amazon getting into the mix, all of that, I do think is going to be a good thing. I will be sad because now there's a potential lawsuit between Turner Sports, TNT, and the league and Amazon and all that. We don't need to get into it because it doesn't truly matter to us materially. I will be sad about Inside the NBA going away. I think that's a great show for just kind of everyone who wants something a little bit lighter. You know, I talked to a lot of like other Locked On people and like, oh, we don't care if it goes away. Like it wasn't that good. Yeah, if you want like in-depth, deep analysis, you don't get that on Locked On NBA. If it's 9:30, 10 p.m., midnight on whatever night, and you're just like winding down after watching a game, Chuck, Shaq joking around on there is like the best thing when you don't need that deep analysis. You just want to kind of still watch things as you wind down a little bit, hear some familiar voices and hear some funny jokes and have some fun with it. They do that probably better than anyone else, and I will be sad if that goes away. But at least Roundabout Rock is back, and that's an awesome song. I'd be playing it if I had the rights to it on the show right now. We don't, so we're not going to. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. If you got something you want to hear about on the show, let me know. Might make it up here because that was a great question that we turned into the majority of today's show. So I appreciate that. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. And I'll be back with y'all tomorrow here on the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.